As Clara gazes up at the night sky, her eyes reflecting the glow of distant stars, she feels a presence, something familiar, yet unspoken. The cool night air whispers secrets only she can hear, and in the silent twinkling of Orion, she senses her mother's voice, calling out from the heavens. What message could the stars be carrying tonight? And why does it feel as if the answers are just beyond her reach?
Clara woke up to the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The chilly morning air filtered through the cracks of the old wooden house she shared with her grandfather, Miguel. The sky outside was a blanket of heavy clouds, casting a gray tone over the small coastal town that had become her sanctuary, or perhaps her prison, ever since her parents died 2 years ago. She lay in bed for a moment, her body heavy with the remnants of a dream she couldn't quite remember. Something about stars and laughter. But the feeling of warmth that it brought was quickly replaced by the familiar ache in her chest. Sighing, she pushed herself out of bed, the wooden floor cold beneath her feet as she made her way downstairs. The smell of fresh coffee greeted her as she entered the kitchen, where Miguel stood by the stove, humming softly as he prepared their breakfast. His face, withered by years of fishing and hard work, softened into a smile when he saw her. "Good morning, young lady," he said, placing a cup of tea on the table for her. "Good morning, Grandpa," Clara replied, her voice flat but polite, as she sat down and began spreading butter on a piece of bread. The silence between them was not new. Ever since the accident, they had fallen into this quiet routine. Miguel had done his best to raise her with all the love and care he could muster, but there was something neither of them could touch, an unspoken grief that lingered in the air. It was as if the house itself carried the weight of those who were no longer there. Outside, the wind howled, making the walls creak and groan. Clara could hear the ocean in the distance, its steady rhythm both comforting and isolating. She missed the days when she used to love the sound of the sea, when it reminded her of the nights spent on the beach with her parents, staring up at the stars. But now, the stars felt like something distant, unreachable, just like them. "Do you remember when we used to go to the beach to watch the stars with my parents?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Miguel stopped, his back to her as he stood at the counter. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her. But then he turned, his eyes full of memories that seemed to weigh him down. "Yeah, I remember," he said, his voice quiet. "Your dad loved those nights. He always said the stars told stories for those who knew how to listen." Clara smiled faintly, but it was a smile touched with sadness. She missed her parents with an intensity that never seemed to fade, no matter how much time passed. "I miss them," she admitted, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Miguel walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I miss them too, Querida. But they're still with us, in a way. In our memories, in the stars." Clara nodded, but she wasn't sure if she believed that. Memories didn't feel like enough. The weight of their absence was a constant presence, and no amount of stargazing could fill that void. The rest of breakfast passed in silence. Miguel returned to his usual tasks, and Clara retreated upstairs, needing the quiet of her room. As she stepped into the familiar space, her eyes drifted to the old bookshelf in the corner, filled with dusty books and trinkets from her childhood. But something else caught her attention, an old wooden box, half hidden beneath some forgotten clothes at the back of her closet. She hadn't seen that box in years. Her heart quickened as she pulled it out, the wood cool under her fingers. Opening it, she found a collection of small keepsakes, old photographs, letters, and at the bottom, a small, weathered notebook. Clara's breath hitched. She had never seen this notebook before. With trembling hands, she opened the first page. There, in her mother's handwriting, was a short inscription, "For my Clara, who will always find the stars, even in the darkest nights. With love, Mom." Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the words. Memories rushed back in a wave so strong that it almost knocked the breath out of her. Her mother's voice, her laugh, the warmth of her arms around her on those starry nights by the ocean. And now, here in her hands, was a piece of her mother she had never known existed. Clara turned the page, her hands shaking, unsure if she was ready for what came next. Clara's eyes darted across the page, absorbing every word as though they might vanish at any moment. The notebook was full of her mother's handwriting, notes, little observations, and memories. As she turned each page, Clara was transported back to those nights spent under the stars with her parents. Her heart ached with each memory. One entry in particular caught her eye. "Tonight, we saw Orion's belt, and I told Clara how those stars have been guiding travelers for centuries. She looked up at them, her eyes wide with wonder, and I thought, one day, she will find her own path, guided by stars only she can see." Clara felt a lump form in her throat. Her mother's words had always been full of love and hope, a belief that no matter what happened, Clara would find her way. But that had been before everything went dark, before the accident. Now, she wasn't so sure her path even existed. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Clara couldn't tear her mind away from the notebook, from the memories it stirred within her. She wandered through the house, trying to focus on mundane tasks, folding laundry, cleaning her room, but her thoughts kept drifting back to those nights at the beach. The sound of the ocean was always present in their lives. It had been a constant companion, a background rhythm that underscored their days. Her father, an avid stargazer, had taught her all the constellations. He would take her and her mother out to the beach after dark, spreading out a blanket on the cool sand, and together they'd gaze at the heavens. "What do you see up there, Clara?" he would ask, his voice filled with quiet excitement. "Stars," she'd reply, giggling as he pulled her into his arms. "Look closer," he'd say. "Every star has a story. You just have to listen." Clara smiled at the memory, but it was a smile laced with pain. She missed those days, those moments when the world seemed so much bigger and brighter. Now, the stars felt distant, unreachable. As evening began to fall, Clara found herself unable to stay inside any longer. She slipped out the front door and walked down to the edge of the cliffs where she could see the ocean stretching out endlessly before her. The sun was setting, casting an orange and pink glow over the horizon, but all Clara could think about were the stars that would soon take its place in the sky. The wind tugged at her hair, and she closed her eyes, trying to remember the last time she had looked up at the stars without feeling the weight of her loss. It had been so long since she'd let herself think of the stars as anything but a reminder of what she had lost. But now, with the notebook in her hand, something had shifted. The words her mother had written seemed to pull her back toward those memories, not as painful reminders, but as connections to a time when her family had been whole. She sat down on a rock, the cool breeze wrapping around her as the first stars began to appear in the deepening sky. She could almost hear her father's voice, pointing out the constellations one by one. "There's Orion," she whispered to herself, spotting the familiar 3 stars that made up his belt. It had always been her favorite constellation, mostly because of the stories her father would tell. He said Orion was a guardian, a protector of memories, watching over the people who remembered those who had come before. Clara's fingers tightened around the notebook. She hadn't been to the beach since her parents' deaths. It had seemed too painful, too full of ghosts. But now it felt different. Maybe it was time to go back. Maybe she needed to confront those memories, to find something in them that could help her move forward. The sound of footsteps behind her pulled Clara from her thoughts. She turned to see Miguel approaching, his face lined with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. Clara nodded. "I was just thinking about Mom and Dad, about the stars." Miguel sat down beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "They loved looking at the stars with you. Your father, he always said that the stars were a way to stay connected, even when we're far apart." Clara's chest tightened. "Do you think that's true? That they're still with us, somehow?" Miguel didn't answer right away. He looked up at the sky, as if searching for something in the growing darkness. "I think they never really leave us, Clara. Not completely. As long as we remember them, they're still here, in some way." Clara followed his gaze, her eyes tracing the outline of Orion. Maybe her grandfather was right. Maybe the stars weren't just distant lights in the sky. Maybe they were something more. Something that connected her to the past, and to her parents. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe it was time to go back to the beach. Maybe there was something waiting for her there. "I want to go to the beach tonight," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Miguel looked at her, his expression softening. "Then we'll go, Clarita. We'll go." As the evening deepened, Clara felt a strange mixture of apprehension and anticipation. It had been so long since she had set foot on the beach at night. The idea of returning to that place, where so many of her happiest memories were intertwined with her deepest sorrows, made her heart race. But something about the notebook, about her mother's words, pulled her forward. She headed back inside to grab a sweater before their walk, her hands trembling slightly as she folded the notebook and tucked it under her arm. When she reached her room, her eyes fell on the wooden box where she had found the notebook. Curiosity got the better of her, and she knelt down beside it, carefully pulling the lid open again. The smell of old paper filled the air, mixing with the faint scent of the sea that always lingered in the house. There were letters from her mother, small notes written in careful, flowing script. Clara's fingers traced the edges of the envelopes, as if touching them would bring her mother back, even if just for a moment. She opened one of the letters, reading the familiar words her mother had often spoken to her. Clara, my love, it began, never forget that even on the darkest nights, the stars are still shining. You just have to find them. Clara swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. How had she not found these before? How had she lived in this house, surrounded by her mother's words, and never seen them? Maybe it had been too painful to look before. Maybe she hadn't been ready. Now, though, things felt different. It wasn't that the pain was gone, it was still there, sharp and relentless, but the notebook and the letters had brought something else into the mix. They had brought a sense of connection, of continuity. Her mother had known her so well, even anticipating her need for comfort in the years to come. Miguel's voice drifted up the stairs. Clara, are you ready? She quickly closed the box and stood, the notebook tucked securely under her arm. Coming, Grandpa, she called back. As they walked down the familiar path toward the beach, the air grew cooler, and the scent of salt filled Clara's lungs. She hadn't realized how much she missed the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the rhythmic pulse of the ocean that had once lulled her to sleep. Now, it felt both foreign and comforting, like revisiting a place she had only known in dreams. Miguel walked beside her in silence, his presence steady and reassuring. They didn't need to speak. The quiet between them was familiar, comforting in its own way. As they approached the beach, Clara hesitated for a moment, her feet sinking into the cool sand. The last time she had been here at night was with her parents. The memory flashed vividly in her mind, her father setting up the old blanket, her mother pointing out constellations, her own laughter filling the air. It was a memory so clear, so real, that for a second she thought she might turn around and see them standing there. But when she looked, there was only the empty shoreline. Miguel spread the blanket on the sand and sat down, patting the space beside him. Clara joined him, hugging her knees to her chest as she stared out at the ocean. The sky above them was dotted with stars, the same stars she had looked at with her parents all those years ago. Do you remember what your father used to say about the stars? Miguel asked softly, his eyes fixed on the sky. Clara nodded. He said they told stories. Miguel smiled. That's right. He always believed that if you looked long enough, you'd find your own story written in the stars. Clara looked up at the sky, searching for something, anything, that might connect her to that feeling. Her eyes landed on Orion's belt, the familiar 3 stars shining brightly above her. There's Orion, she whispered. Dad always said Orion was a guardian. Miguel nodded. A guardian of memories. And memories are the stars we carry with us, Clara. Even when we can't see them, they're still there. Clara's chest tightened at his words. She had spent so long avoiding these memories, afraid that if she let herself feel them, she would be overwhelmed. But now, sitting here under the stars with her grandfather, she realized something. The memories weren't her enemy. They were what connected her to her parents, to the love they had shared. She opened the notebook and read aloud the passage her mother had written about Orion. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she didn't stop. Tonight, I told Clara the story of Orion, the guardian of the stars. She looked at the sky with such wonder in her eyes, and I could see how much she loved the stories. I hope she always remembers that no matter where she is, the stars will guide her. They will remind her that she is never truly alone. When she finished reading, the silence between her and Miguel was heavy with emotion. Clara closed the notebook, holding it tightly in her lap. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt something other than grief. She felt a flicker of warmth, of connection, like a star blinking in the darkness. Miguel placed a hand on her shoulder. Your parents would be proud of you, Clara. I know they're watching over you, just like the stars. Clara looked up at the sky, and for the first time in years, she believed him. The next morning, Clara woke up with a strange sense of calm. The emotional weight she had carried for so long was still there, but it felt lighter somehow. The memories of her parents had been too painful to revisit before, but after last night's walk to the beach, something had changed. The stars, the stories her father told, and her mother's words in the notebook, they all seemed to be guiding her towards something she couldn't yet name. She spent most of the morning in her room, flipping through the notebook again. Each entry her mother had written was like a small gift, filled with wisdom and love. The pages were covered with descriptions of the nights they had spent stargazing, her mother's thoughts on the beauty of the universe, and musings on life and loss. Clara hadn't known her mother had kept such a detailed record of those moments. One particular passage stood out to her. Last night, I watched Clara laugh as her father told her the story of the Pleiades. It was such a simple moment, but I realized then how much these small memories matter. One day, when we're no longer here, I hope Clara remembers that it's not the big things that define a life, but these quiet, beautiful moments. Clara closed the notebook, her fingers lingering on the cover. Her mother had known, even before the accident, how important it was to hold on to the small joys, the little connections that made life meaningful. For so long, Clara had been focused on the loss, on the sudden, tragic absence of her parents, that she had forgotten about the moments that made her feel alive. She walked downstairs, the house quiet except for the distant hum of the ocean. Miguel was out back, tending to the small garden he had started last spring. He looked up as Clara stepped outside, a soft smile on his face. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, wiping his hands on his worn work gloves. Clara took a deep breath, glancing at the sky. "Better, I think. I've been reading more of Mom's notebook. It's helping." Miguel nodded, his eyes kind. "Your mother had a way with words. She always knew how to find the right things to say, even when things were hard." Clara sat down on the porch steps, looking out at the garden. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and earth, reminding her of those long summer days spent with her parents by the water. Her father had always loved planting things, though he had never been very good at it. He'd once joked that his hands were better suited for pointing out stars than for tending to flowers. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," Clara said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About how memories are like stars." Miguel took off his gloves and sat beside her, his face thoughtful. "I believe that, Clara. We carry the people we love with us, even after they're gone. And the stars, they're reminders of that." Clara hugged her knees to her chest, staring out at the distant horizon. "I think I'm starting to understand what Mom meant. She wrote about the little things, the moments we don't think are important until they're gone. I've spent so much time focusing on losing them that I forgot to hold on to the good memories." Miguel's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "It's easy to get lost in the pain, but your mother was right. Those small moments are what make life worth living." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle deep within her. She thought back to the nights spent on the beach, the way her mother's laughter would fill the air, and how her father's voice would soften when he spoke about the stars. Those memories had been buried beneath her grief for so long, but now, they were starting to shine again, just like the stars in the sky. "I think I want to start going to the beach more often," Clara said, surprising herself with the realization. "Maybe it's time I stopped avoiding it." Miguel smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with affection. "I think that's a good idea. The beach has always been a place of peace for our family. Your father, he would have loved to see you there again." Clara looked out at the garden, the colors of the flowers swaying in the gentle breeze. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel weighed down by the sadness. It was still there, yes, but it wasn't suffocating her anymore. Instead, it felt like a part of her, something she could carry without fear of being consumed by it. As the day stretched on, Clara felt a growing sense of clarity. Her parents were gone, but they hadn't left her completely. They were in the stars, in the memories she had long buried, and in the lessons they had taught her. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Even in the darkest nights, the stars are still shining. You just have to find them." That evening, Clara found herself back at the beach. She stood on the sand, staring out at the ocean as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The sky above her was slowly filling with stars, each one a reminder of the life she had shared with her parents. Clara took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. Maybe her mother had been right all along. The stars weren't just distant lights, they were connections, reminders of the love that would never truly fade. Clara smiled softly to herself, her eyes tracing the outline of Orion in the night sky. "I'm ready to start looking again," she whispered. The following day, Clara found herself filled with a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of the past wasn't gone, but it was different now, less suffocating. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, it was time to reconnect with the world she had been avoiding. The beach, which had once been a place of laughter and stargazing, had become a source of pain after her parents' death. But now, it felt like a place where healing could begin. She stood by the window, watching the waves roll onto the shore in the distance. It was the same beach, the same ocean, but she wasn't the same person. Something inside her had shifted after reading her mother's words. There was a warmth in those memories, a sense that the love they had shared was still with her, even if they were not. Clara knew she had to go back. Later that afternoon, she found her grandfather sitting on the porch, a book in his lap. He looked up as she approached, his eyes warm with the same quiet strength that had always comforted her. For a moment, Clara hesitated, not sure how to begin the conversation that had been building inside her since the night before. "Grandpa," she said softly, sitting beside him on the porch swing, "I've been thinking, do you think we could go to the beach tonight? Like we used to?" Miguel's eyes softened, a smile forming at the corners of his mouth. I was wondering when you might ask, he said, his voice gentle. I think it's a good idea. It's been too long, hasn't it? Clara nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. It just feels like I've been avoiding it for so long. But now, after everything I've read in Mom's notebook, I feel like I need to go back. Like maybe it's time to face those memories instead of running from them. Miguel reached over and placed a hand on hers. You don't have to rush anything, Querida. But if you're ready, I'll go with you. We can take the blanket, like we used to. Clara felt a lump rise in her throat, but she managed to smile. Yeah, I'd like that. The rest of the day passed slowly as Clara prepared herself mentally for the evening ahead. She rummaged through her room, finding the old blanket they had always used for stargazing. It was worn but still soft, and the familiar texture brought back memories of the nights spent with her parents, huddled together under the vast sky. The stars had always felt so close then, as if they were watching over them. As the sun began to set, Clara and Miguel made their way down the familiar path toward the beach. The air was cooler now, the crisp scent of the ocean filling their lungs as they walked. Clara felt her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. This was the first time in years that she had returned to the beach at night. So many emotions were tied to this place: love, loss, and now, perhaps, hope. The beach was quiet, the only sound the gentle lapping of the waves against the shore. The sky was beginning to darken, and Clara could already see the faint outline of stars starting to appear above them. Miguel spread out the blanket on the sand, and they both sat down, side by side, just like they had so many times before. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Clara stared out at the horizon, watching as the stars slowly filled the sky, one by one. The familiar constellations began to take shape, and her heart ached with the bittersweet memories they brought back. Do you see that one? Miguel said after a while, pointing toward a cluster of stars near the horizon. That's Orion, your father's favorite. Clara nodded, her eyes tracing the shape of the constellation. He used to say that Orion was a guardian, right? A protector of memories. Miguel smiled softly. He did. And he believed that as long as we could see the stars, we would never be truly alone. Clara's chest tightened, but she didn't look away from the sky. I think he was right, she whispered. I think they're still with us. In the stars, in the memories. Miguel placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and comforting. They are, Clara. They'll always be with us. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she let the moment wash over her, allowing herself to feel the grief, the love, and the connection that had always been there, just beneath the surface. For so long, she had been afraid to come back to this place. She had been afraid that the memories would overwhelm her, that the pain would be too much to bear. But now, sitting here under the stars with her grandfather, she realized that the memories weren't something to fear. They were a part of her, a part of the love her parents had left behind. I've missed this, Clara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. Miguel smiled, his eyes full of understanding. I have too, Querida. I have too. They sat there in silence for a while longer, watching as the sky grew darker and the stars shone brighter above them. Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. The stars, the beach, and the memories of her parents, it all felt right. As they began to pack up and head back to the house, Clara glanced up at the sky one last time. The stars twinkled above her, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always light to be found. And for the first time in years, Clara felt like she was finally starting to heal. The following days brought a strange sense of calm to Clara's life. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest for so long had lightened, and she found herself thinking more about the stars, the memories, and the lessons her parents had left behind. Returning to the beach that night with her grandfather had stirred something in her, and now the idea of visiting the beach again no longer filled her with dread. A few nights later, Clara found herself walking the same path to the beach. This time, she didn't feel the nervousness that had consumed her before. Instead, she felt a quiet anticipation, as if the beach had become a place where she could reconnect with her parents' memory in a way that brought her peace. She carried the old blanket under her arm, just like her father used to do. The sky above was clear, and she could already see the faint twinkle of stars appearing as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sound of the waves, rhythmic and soothing, greeted her as she reached the shore. The beach was empty, just as it had been the last time, but tonight, it felt less lonely. Clara spread the blanket on the cool sand, sitting down and wrapping her arms around her knees. She gazed out at the ocean, its surface dark and endless, reflecting the sky above. The stars were starting to fill the sky, each one a tiny point of light in the vast expanse. For a moment, Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound of the waves wash over her. She imagined her parents sitting beside her, their presence warm and comforting. She could almost hear her father's voice, pointing out the constellations like he used to, telling stories about each one. When she opened her eyes, the sky had darkened further, and the stars were now fully visible. Clara's gaze drifted to the familiar outline of Orion, the constellation that had meant so much to her father. The 3 stars that made up Orion's belt stood out brightly against the deep indigo sky, just as they always had. "There you are," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the waves. She reached into her bag and pulled out her mother's notebook, the pages now worn from the many times she had flipped through them. There was something comforting about holding it in her hands, like a physical connection to her mother. Clara opened the notebook to one of the entries she had read so many times before. "Tonight, we saw Orion again, and I told Clara the story of how he became the guardian of the stars." She listened with such focus, her eyes full of wonder. "I wonder if one day she'll realize that she's a guardian too, of our stories, our memories, and the love we've shared." Clara smiled softly as she read the words. Her mother had always had a way of making the stars seem magical, as though they were more than just distant lights in the sky. For her mother, they were symbols of love and connection, reminders of the people who had come before. Looking up at the stars now, Clara realized how true that was. The stars weren't just distant points of light, they were markers of memory, of moments shared, and of the love that still lingered even after her parents were gone. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt like she was starting to understand what her parents had been trying to teach her all those years. The stars weren't something to be afraid of or to avoid because of the pain they reminded her of. Instead, they were something to embrace, something that could bring her comfort in the darkest moments. As she sat there, Clara began to feel a sense of clarity. Her parents were gone, but they weren't lost. They lived on in the stories they had told, in the lessons they had passed down, and in the memories they had created together. They were in the stars, always watching, always present. Clara took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the sky above her. The beach, the stars, the memories, they were all connected, woven together in a way that made her feel whole again. She wasn't alone. She never had been. Time passed slowly, the sound of the waves filling the quiet night as Clara stayed there, her thoughts drifting between the past and the present. She didn't need to rush this moment. For the first time, she felt at peace simply being there, allowing the memories to come and go, not fighting them or trying to push them away. Eventually, as the air grew cooler and the sky darker, Clara gathered her things and stood up. The notebook felt lighter in her hands now, as if the words inside had finally found a place in her heart where they could rest. Before she left the beach, Clara took one last look at the stars. They twinkled brightly above her, silent but full of meaning. She smiled softly, feeling the warmth of their presence, knowing that her parents were still with her in every step she took. As she turned and walked back toward the house, Clara felt a quiet certainty settle within her. She had returned to the beach, and she had found what she didn't even know she was looking for: peace, connection, and the knowledge that the love of her parents would always be there, as constant as the stars in the sky. Clara's return to the beach became a quiet ritual over the next few weeks. Each evening, she would walk the familiar path down to the shore, her mother's notebook tucked under her arm, and sit beneath the stars. Sometimes she would read, letting her mother's words guide her through the memories. Other nights, she would simply watch the sky, tracing the constellations and thinking of her parents, letting the sound of the waves soothe her. Miguel often joined her, bringing along his own quiet presence, never intruding but always there when she needed him. They didn't talk much during those moments, and they didn't need to. The unspoken understanding between them was enough, a bond strengthened by the shared loss and love for the people they both missed. One night, as they sat side by side on the blanket, Miguel broke the comfortable silence. "You know, Clara," he began softly, his eyes focused on the sky, "your father believed that the stars were more than just lights in the sky. He always said they held memories, and that if we looked closely enough, we could see the stories of the people we've lost." Clara looked over at her grandfather, her heart warming at the thought. "He used to say that Orion was the guardian of those memories," she said, her voice quiet. Miguel nodded. "That's right. Your father believed that Orion wasn't just a constellation, but a protector of the stories we carry with us. He used to tell me that every time we looked up at Orion, it was like remembering all the good things, the love, the laughter, the moments we thought were lost." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes tracing the shape of Orion in the sky. She had heard that story so many times as a child, but now, it took on a new meaning. It wasn't just a tale her father had told to entertain her. It was something deeper, something that connected her to the past and to the love her parents had shared with her. I used to think those were just bedtime stories, Clara admitted, her voice soft. But now I understand what he meant. It's not just about the stars. It's about holding on to the memories, even when it feels like everything is gone. Miguel turned to her, his expression thoughtful. Memories are like the stars, Clara. They're always there, even when we can't see them. And when we do see them, they remind us of the people we love, the people who have shaped us. Clara nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had spent so much time trying to avoid the memories, afraid that they would bring her nothing but pain. But now, sitting here with her grandfather, she realized that the memories were a source of strength. They were a way to keep her parents close, even if they were no longer physically present. Her gaze returned to the sky, where Orion stood watch over the night. The stars twinkled faintly, as if echoing the sentiment that had been passed down from her father to her. The thought of Orion as a guardian of memories brought her a strange sense of peace. For a long time, they sat in silence, their eyes on the stars. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and the waves continued their steady rhythm against the shore. It was as though the universe itself was speaking to them, reminding them that time moves forward, but the past is never truly lost. Clara opened her mother's notebook again, flipping to a page she hadn't read before. Her mother's familiar handwriting filled the page, a brief entry written just a few months before the accident. I told Clara the story of Orion again tonight. She asked if the stars will always be there, and I told her that yes, they would. But more than that, I told her that the stories we tell, the memories we share, those are the things that last forever. The stars are just a reminder. I hope that one day, when she looks up at the sky, she'll remember that she's never alone. We're all part of something bigger, something connected by the stories we carry with us. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. Her mother had known. She had understood, even then, the importance of the stories they shared, the memories they made together. And now, years later, Clara was beginning to understand it too. She closed the notebook, resting it on her lap. The stars above seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if acknowledging the connection that had always been there, just waiting for her to see it. Miguel placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. Your parents left you a lot, Clara. Not just in the things they said or did, but in the way they lived. The memories you have, the love they gave you, that's something no one can take away. Clara smiled, her heart full. I know, she said softly. I'm finally starting to see that. As the night grew darker and the stars continued to shine above them, Clara felt a sense of completeness she hadn't felt in years. The memories of her parents were no longer something she needed to run from or bury deep inside. Instead, they were something to treasure, to hold close, like a constellation that guided her through the darkest nights. And just like Orion, standing guard over the night sky, Clara realized that she, too, could be a guardian of those memories, a keeper of the stories that connected her to the past and to the love that would never fade. I think I'm ready to start telling those stories, Clara said, her voice steady and strong. To keep them alive, the way Mom and Dad did. Miguel smiled, his eyes full of pride. I think that's exactly what they'd want. As they packed up the blanket and began to walk back to the house, Clara glanced up at the sky one last time. Orion was still there, watching over her, just as her father had promised. And for the first time, Clara didn't feel like she was looking at the past. She was looking toward the future, with her parents' love guiding her every step of the way. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside Clara had shifted. The beach had become her refuge again, not a place she avoided but a place she sought out. She continued to visit the shore in the evenings, often alone, carrying her mother's notebook with her. The stars above no longer felt like reminders of what she had lost, but symbols of what she still carried with her, memories, love, and the connection to her parents. One evening, Clara sat on the sand, her mother's notebook resting in her lap, the cool breeze playing with the loose strands of her hair. The sky above was clear, and the stars shone brightly, almost as if they were waiting for her. She opened the notebook to one of the last entries, her fingers tracing the words written so carefully by her mother's hand. There's something magical about the stars. I hope that Clara sees that, even if I'm not there to tell her. The night sky holds all the stories we've told, all the memories we've made. And when she looks up, I hope she knows that she's never alone. No matter what happens, the stars will always be there, guiding her. Clara swallowed the lump forming in her throat as she read the passage again. Her mother had written those words just weeks before the accident. It was as if she had known, somehow, that Clara would need these messages later in life, that the stars would become a source of comfort when everything else seemed lost. The sound of footsteps approaching made Clara look up. Miguel was walking toward her, a soft smile on his face as he joined her on the blanket. He sat down next to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "You've been reading that notebook a lot lately," he said gently. Clara nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of the page. "It feels like she's speaking to me through it. Like she knew I would need this, even after she was gone." Miguel looked at her thoughtfully. "Your mother always knew how to find the right words. She had a way of seeing things others couldn't." Clara's eyes returned to the notebook, the words blurring slightly as tears began to fill her eyes. She wrote about the stars a lot, about how they connect us, even when we're apart. Miguel nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the sky. "She believed that. And so did your father. They always thought that the stars were a way to stay connected, no matter how far apart we were." Clara's voice was barely a whisper as she asked, "Do you think they're watching? From wherever they are?" Miguel was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know for sure, but I like to think that they are. I like to believe that when we look up at the stars, they're looking down at us, watching over us." Clara closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze carry away the tears that threatened to fall. She wanted to believe that too, that her parents were still with her, somehow, watching over her from the stars. It was a comforting thought, one that made the emptiness in her heart feel a little less heavy. She opened her eyes and looked up at the sky, at the countless stars shining above. "I think I'm starting to understand what Mom meant," she said softly. "She always said that the stars held our stories. And maybe she's right. Maybe they're more than just lights in the sky. Maybe they're reminders." Miguel smiled, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "I think your mother would be proud of you, Clara. You've come a long way." Clara felt the warmth of his words settle over her like a blanket. It had been a long journey, one filled with grief, pain, and so much uncertainty, but now, sitting here under the stars, she felt a sense of clarity that she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had been afraid to face the memories, afraid that they would overwhelm her. But now, she understood that the memories weren't something to fear. They were what kept her parents alive in her heart, what connected her to them even though they were gone. The stars twinkled brightly above her, silent but full of meaning. Clara smiled softly, feeling the presence of her parents in the night sky, and the memories she carried with her. She closed the notebook gently, her hands resting on the cover. "I think I'm ready to move forward," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I'll always miss them, but I know they're still with me. And that's enough." Miguel's eyes shone with pride as he nodded. "That's all they ever wanted for you, Clara. To find peace, to live your life, knowing that their love is always with you." Clara looked up at the stars again, the familiar constellations comforting her in a way they hadn't before. She had always looked to the sky with longing, with a sense of loss. But now, she looked at the stars with a new understanding. They were her connection to the past, yes, but they were also her guide to the future. "I'm going to keep telling their stories," Clara said, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm going to keep their memories alive, just like they did for me." Miguel smiled, his hand squeezing her shoulder gently. "That's the best way to honor them, Clara. By living your life, by sharing their stories." Clara felt the truth of his words deep in her heart. Her parents had taught her so much, about love, about life, and about the stars. And now, it was her turn to carry those lessons forward. As the night deepened and the stars shone even brighter, Clara felt a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. The journey of grief, of finding her way back to the memories, wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt ready to take the next step. She looked up at Orion, standing tall in the night sky, and whispered a quiet thank you. The stars had always been there, watching over her, guiding her. And now, she knew, they always would be. The following day, Clara felt lighter than she had in years. It wasn't that the grief was gone, she knew that would always be with her, but it no longer weighed her down as it once had. It had become a part of her, something she could carry without fear of being overwhelmed. The memories of her parents, once too painful to face, now brought her comfort. That morning, as she wandered through the house, Clara found herself stopping in front of an old family photo that hung on the wall. It was one of her favorites, her and her parents standing on the beach, the sky behind them painted with the colors of sunset. She was just a child then, barely tall enough to reach her father's waist, but she remembered the day vividly. They had spent hours playing in the sand and swimming in the ocean before settling down to watch the stars together. Clara smiled at the memory, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. For so long, she had avoided looking at these photos, afraid that they would only remind her of what she had lost. But now, as she looked at the happy faces staring back at her, she realized that these were the moments she needed to hold on to, the moments that defined her family, not the tragedy that had taken them away. Her parents had lived full, joyful lives, and they had given her a childhood filled with love, laughter, and stories. That was what mattered. The accident had taken them too soon, but it hadn't erased the years of happiness they had shared. As Clara stood there, lost in thought, Miguel entered the room. He saw her looking at the photo and smiled softly. That was a good day, wasn't it? Clara nodded, her eyes never leaving the image. It was. One of the best. Miguel came to stand beside her, his eyes full of warmth. Your parents were so proud of you, Clara. They loved you more than anything. Clara felt a lump form in her throat, but this time, it wasn't from sadness. I know, she whispered. I miss them every day, but I think I'm finally starting to accept that they're gone. And that's okay, because I still have all of this, the memories, the love they gave me. Miguel placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. That's the most important thing, Querida. The love they gave you, that's something that will never fade. Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of his words settle deep in her heart. I'm going to keep telling their stories, Grandpa. I'm going to keep them alive, just like they would have wanted. Miguel's eyes shone with pride. I know you will, and they'll always be with you, and everything you do. Clara felt a sense of peace wash over her as she looked at the photo one last time before turning away. The memories were no longer something to run from. They were a part of her, a part of the person she had become, and she was ready to embrace them fully. Later that evening, Clara decided to take another walk to the beach. The air was warm, the sun low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sand. As she made her way down the familiar path, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. This place, which had once been filled with so much pain, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could remember her parents and feel close to them. When she reached the shore, Clara stood for a moment, breathing in the salty air and listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves. The ocean stretched out before her, vast and endless, and the sky above was beginning to darken, the first stars twinkling into view. Clara spread the old blanket on the sand and sat down, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and for the first time in a long while, Clara allowed herself to simply be in the moment. She didn't think about the past or the future. She just watched the sunset, feeling the quiet beauty of it. As the stars began to fill the sky, Clara leaned back, resting her head on the blanket. The familiar constellations slowly came into focus, and her gaze found Orion, standing tall in the night sky. She smiled softly, remembering the stories her father had told, the way he had made the stars feel like old friends. You're still watching, aren't you? Clara whispered, her eyes tracing the outline of the constellation. I can feel you with me. For so long, Clara had been afraid to let go, afraid that moving on meant forgetting. But now, she understood that letting go didn't mean losing the memories. It meant accepting them, cherishing them, and allowing herself to live fully in the present while carrying the love of her parents with her. The stars twinkled brightly above, and Clara felt a quiet sense of gratitude fill her heart. She had come so far on this journey, through the pain, the grief, and the loss, and now she stood on the other side, stronger and more at peace than she had ever thought possible. Her parents were gone, but their love was still here, in the stars, in the memories, and in the life she would continue to live. And that was enough. Clara closed her eyes, the sound of the ocean lulling her into a deep sense of calm. The stars, like the memories of her parents, would always be there to guide her, even on the darkest nights. And for the first time, Clara knew she was ready to move forward, not with sadness, but with hope. As the next evening arrived, Clara felt a growing sense of peace, as though the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. She knew the journey of grief was ongoing, but tonight, standing at the edge of the beach, she felt ready for something new, a fresh beginning, built on the love and memories of her parents that would always stay with her. Miguel joined her on the sand, their old blanket spread out beneath the stars. The sky was clear, and the ocean, calm. The rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore felt like an old, familiar song, comforting in its consistency. Clara gazed at the horizon, watching the last bit of daylight disappear, the soft glow of twilight fading into the deep, starry night. As they settled into the quiet of the evening, Clara found herself reflecting on how far she had come. What had once been a place of unbearable sadness, the beach, the stars, had now transformed into a space of healing and connection. The lessons from her parents were clear now, love transcended time, and memories were not chains that held her back, but guiding lights that would illuminate her path forward. I've been thinking about what you said, about keeping their stories alive, Clara said softly, her eyes still focused on the sky above. I want to do that, not just for me, but for others. I want to share what they taught me, how they saw the world. Miguel looked at her, a proud smile spreading across his face. Your parents would be so proud, Clara. They lived their lives with love, and they passed that on to you. You're carrying that forward in everything you do. Clara felt a swell of emotion in her chest, not of sadness, but of something warm and hopeful. I think I want to start writing about them, she continued. About all the things they believed in, the stories they told me. Maybe their lessons can help other people too. Miguel nodded, his gaze drifting to the stars. That's a beautiful idea, Querida. Your mother and father always believed that the stars told stories, and now it's your turn to tell them. Clara smiled, imagining the stories she could share, stories of love, laughter, and the little moments that had shaped her childhood. The lessons her parents had passed down to her through the constellations and the countless nights spent stargazing were treasures she could now offer to the world. As they sat in peaceful silence, Clara opened her mother's notebook one last time, flipping through the pages. The words on the final page caught her eye, and she read them aloud to Miguel. One day, Clara will look up at the stars and understand. She'll see that we're always with her, guiding her through the stories we've shared, the love we've given. And when she's ready, I hope she knows that she has her own stories to tell, her own stars to follow. Clara closed the notebook, a soft smile on her lips. I think I understand now, she said quietly. I'm ready to follow my own stars, but I know I'll always have theirs to guide me. Miguel nodded, his eyes filled with pride. You've come a long way, Clara. And wherever you go, they'll be with you, just as they've always been. Clara looked up at the sky, the familiar constellations twinkling above her. Orion stood tall in the night, as if watching over her, just as her father had always said. She felt their presence in the stars, in the memories, in the love they had given her, and knew, without a doubt, that they would continue to guide her, no matter where life took her. The future stretched out before her, vast and full of possibilities. Clara didn't know exactly what it would hold, but she knew she was ready to face it with open arms, carrying the love of her parents with her, always. As the night deepened, Clara stood, her gaze still fixed on the stars. The beach, once a place of sorrow, had become a place of hope, a symbol of everything she had gained through loss. The memories of her parents were no longer painful, they were a source of strength, of light, guiding her through the darkness. I think I'm ready now, Clara whispered, her voice carried away by the gentle breeze. Miguel stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Ready for what, Querida? Clara smiled, her eyes shining with quiet determination. For whatever comes next, for the stories I'll tell, for the life I'll live, and for the stars I'll keep following. Miguel's smile mirrored her own as they stood together, looking out at the vast expanse of sky and sea. The stars above them shimmered, as if acknowledging the journey Clara had taken, through grief, through memory, and back to herself. As they began to walk back home, Clara glanced up at the sky one last time. Orion still stood watch, as always, a reminder of the love and the stories that had shaped her. And as she walked, Clara knew that wherever life led her next, she would never truly be alone. The stars, and the love of her parents, would always be with her. And with that knowledge, Clara stepped forward into the future, her heart full of peace, hope, and the unwavering belief that the stars would always guide her way.